Well, you want me to tell you about Midway Island? What do you say first? How did I get there? I was in the Navy, Airedale. Airedale is Navy aviation. After I finished electronics school in Memphis, uh, we all got transferred to different places, and I was transferred to the carrier Midway. But somewhere along the way, when I got to Barbers Point in Hawaii, for some reason they sent me to Midway Island instead of the carrier Midway, and I don't know why to this day. But Midway is a very small island. There's actually two islands. One's called Sand, and one's called Eastern, I believe. And they're surrounded by an atoll. And the island that was occupied, that I stayed on, was I think 3/4 of a mile long and a half a mile wide and 40 foot high. Small place.
40 foot.
Yeah. The other island was off limits. It hadn't been occupied since World War II. But we used to swim over there because you could go into the underground dining halls, and there were food trays laying there with petrified food on it. There were jeeps parked in kind of bunkers with the keys to the ignition. Some of the bunks, people had pictures of Ann Sheridan and Betty Grable still hung up there. Because when the war was over, they just left.
Now, what year was this that you were there?
I can't remember, 52 or 3.
So it wasn't that long after the war.
No. In fact, when we arrived there, we were the first ones to get there since World War II. And we set off in a tugboat and shot rats for 2 days. I mean, the rats were huge over there. And we moved into a Quonset hut. We were the electronics unit. And they were bringing the island back into use because they needed a place for airplanes to land, bringing wounded back from Korea. So this bombed out Quonset hut, we had to clean it up with little glass and garbage. But there's no women on the island, and hardly anything to do except swim. And they have some of the most beautiful beaches there, beats anything Hawaii has. Beautiful sandy beaches.
How many men were there now?
There's probably 80 to 100 of us. And the only building, the powerhouse had been hit by the Japanese, and somebody rebuilt that. And there was an old hotel there that Pan Am used to use for people flying to Japan. It was called the Gooney Hotel. Very nice old building. That became the officers' club. The rest of us lived in the Quonset huts. Anyway, Midway's a bird paradise. They had over 1 million gooney birds in this island. Their real name is Laysan albatross. And there was an article in the Oregonian a year ago about Midway, and I didn't know this before, but they said that 70% of the world's Laysan albatross live on Midway, and that's one of them right there. Well, we didn't have much to do there except maintain the transmitters and swim and read, and no women, as I said. But after a while, you forget about them. Although one day, this actress, Terry Moore, I think her name was, she'd been in Korea entertaining the troops, and she was kind of famous for having a mink bathing suit.
Yeah, I remember that.
And she stopped on her way back from Korea at Midway to refuel. And of course, on Midway, we were kind of a ragtag outfit. People didn't dress very sharp, kind of wild guys. And she had her mink mink bikini on, and she came to the door of the plane to, wave and smile. And she looked out there, and here's about 100 of the most wild-eyed, hungry guys she'd ever seen. And she turned around, went back in the plane, wouldn't come out. But anyhow, one of the beautiful things aside from the swimming there are the birds. The gooney birds, they're called gooney because they're so awkward on land. In the air, they're just the most graceful thing you ever saw. But on land, they're very clumsy. When they come in for a landing, they'll have their wings out like brakes and then both feet out in front of them. And they've got these beautiful brown eyes and a big beak, and they look kind of nervous, and they come in jockeying for landing, and they just go head over heels and tumble. Because they've been at sea, they're at sea a lot, and when they come,
when they hit the ground, they tumble?
they just go somersault. But they just kind of look frightened, and they jockeying for position, and then
So
they
it's a controlled crash landing.
it's a controlled crash landing, right? And on takeoff, they need, because they're a big bird, I don't know how much they weigh, but they have to get a long runway, maybe 50, 60 feet, before they can get airborne. So on the paths around the island, they would go run like crazy, faster and faster, and then they get their wings out, and this determined look on their face. And finally, they get enough speed, they get airborne, and slowly they gain altitude. But they're very comical. And in fact, one night I was riding my bicycle down this path through scabiola bushes, is about what grew there. In the distance, I could hear this pat, 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 pat. I knew a gooney bird was taking off. And there was no moon, and I could hear him coming, and all of a sudden the pit-pat stopped, so I knew he was airborne. So I started zigging and zagging, and I zagged when I should have zigged, and he got me right in the chest and knocked me off my bicycle. In this Quonset hut where the communications equipment was, there was, I think 7 of us lived there. And right next to our Quonset hut was the old submarine base. Part of the building was there. And one day, these birds are just thick all over the place. Not only gooney birds, but there's a beautiful bird called a bosun bird that has 2 long tail feathers that must be 2 feet long. The Japanese almost hunted them out of existence because the feathers were prized. But there are a lot of those. And then they had something called a booby bird, and they were divided into blue-billed, can't say it, blue-billed booby birds and black-billed booby birds.
That is hard to say.
And the other bird that I really like, frigate bird. Frigate bird, the male has a big red pouch, beautiful red color, and they've got a beak on them about 8 inches long. They're a beautiful bird. And sooty terns, there are several 100,000 sooty terns. But with nothing else to do, we became enamored of the birds. And with the planes taking off and landing there, occasionally a gooney bird would get hit with a propeller and killed. And there was one mother that had her nest right outside our Quonset hut, and she apparently got killed because she deserted her egg. So the 7 of us adopted this egg, and one of the guys, the corpsman, I think, of the base, they worked out some kind of incubator arrangement. When the bird was born, we called him Elmer. The corpsman had some kind of a suction thing with a tube on it. The way the young gooney birds eat is the mother goes out and they get fish and squid and different things, and then they go back to the nest and regurgitate that into the baby's mouth. So we fed Elmer the same stew of fish with this, I don't know what you call it. And they use it for suction to clear somebody's throat, but we were squirting sea stuff into Elmer. And he got bigger and bigger. And when they start out with brown feathers, and they kind of look like kind of built like, remember the Smoo in the Little Abner comics? They look like a Smoo with feathers. And then they start molding, and they turn beautiful white and beautiful yellow beak and big brown eyes that seem almost intelligent.
Did you bring him in your Quonset hut at all, or
Yeah, he used to come in and follow us around after he got older.
so he really kind of bonded with you,
Yeah,
and he'd follow you?
yeah. It's the only case I ever saw of any of the birds on the island that almost became domesticated, almost. But we loved that bird. Guys with nothing else to do pick on strange things, I guess.
The other guys kid you about it, or
No, they were all interested in
they
it.
were envious?
Yeah. I think Elmer even had his picture in we didn't have a base newspaper, we had a bulletin. I think he had his picture in there one time. At any rate, there's a certain time of year when the young gooney birds, after they've lost their feathers, they go out to sea. And what they do is they walk down to the water's edge and they just sit there and they stare out to sea. And I don't know what the signal is, but they'll sit there for days. They won't eat, they just sit there and stare out to sea. And then all of a sudden one day they all walk into the water, paddle out, and then they paddle on top of the water until they get enough speed to fly, and away they go. It's just an amazing, I don't know how they decide when to go, but they just all go at once, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them.
Kind of an instinct, like the salmon coming back to the river or something.
I don't know what it is. They just sit there and stare, wouldn't eat, wouldn't do anything, just stare for days. But where our Quonset hut was, there was no beach. They had these big steel pilings, about that wide, driven in to the bank to keep the sand from eroding. And each one of those steel plates had a hole in the middle at the top, which apparently was for the crane to raise and lower it when they installed it. And the birds on that side of the island would line up and they'd look out this little hole in the steel plate. And we'd have to go around and pick them up when all the other birds decided to leave. We'd have to go around and pick them up and throw them in the water because they couldn't get over this steel wall. So it was kind of a ceremony when the birds all left, and one of us picked Elmer up and dropped him in the water. And he paddled off, and all the birds flew east. And we were all, some guys had tears in their eyes because Elmer was leaving. And the other birds headed straight east, and Elmer went east and then circled back around and circled the Quonset hut. And we were all standing there watching him. Well, the transmission towers were held up by steel cables. And Elmer made one pass around the Quonset hut, then started a second one, hit one of those guy wires, broke his neck, and fell dead, practically at our feet. Guys actually broke down and cried. It was really sad.
Now, didn't you tell me earlier that most of these birds just flew straight away, but Elmer, you thought came back to kind of...
We know he came back. We were watching him.
he came back to let you see him fly, or...
As I say, all the other birds just went directly east, and Elmer, we were keeping our eye on him. He maybe went 100 yards that way and then circled around and made 1.5 passes around the Quonset hut. Not too high above our heads, but the second pass he hit the guy wire. So it was very sad. Very sad.
You had a funeral, I believe you said.
Mm-hmm. We had a funeral. I think that's when he made the base bulletin, was his funeral. But very strange that people could be attached to a bird like that, or a bird could be attached to people. You would follow us around. You wouldn't necessarily do anything you told him. If you called him, he wouldn't come. Just when he got in his head to walk in the Quonset and see what we were doing, he'd walk in and look around.
I can see that the story still bothers you, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, you get attached to a bird, but
Yeah, you get attached to almost any animal like that, but
yeah.
it's an unusual story.
They're a beautiful bird. And I don't know whether 100 million birds, you'd think they would all be the same, but it seems to me they had personalities. Get a shot of, this is a grown-up one, it's not a very good shot, but wish I had a better picture.
Put it back up there and I'll focus on it.
Wish I had a better picture that showed the big brown eyes.
Okay.
And they were very amusing birds. They have an unusual mating dance they do. They'll bounce their heads up and down and dance around each other. And one may take his beak and put it under his wing, and the other will stand on its toes with its beak straight in the air and make a honking noise. And then they'll reverse that part of the dance, and one will do the other thing. And it's a very amusing, kind of an intricate dance they do. Very unusual birds.